Right, so now we've done that, we can remove this cable. We're going to keep this guy knocking around on the off chance, because sometimes when you flash Kiss, or should I say sometimes when you set up Kiss, you might find that you've got a motor running the wrong direction. And if that's the case, sometimes within Kiss you can't reverse it, sometimes you can. You shouldn't be able to do it full stop, but sometimes it allows you to. So if we end up with a motor in the wrong direction and we can't sort it out within Kiss, we'll just plug this guy back in again and do the same and reverse motors within BL Heli. So anyway, that is that out of the way. So if we move back onto our build, we're now in a place, we've got the ESC, we've got the voltage regulator, the DJI unit is now powered, the ESCs and motors etc. are all set up. We now need to move on to the last bit, which is essentially putting the Kiss flight controller in, putting our receiver in, and putting in a self-powered buzzer. We need to start thinking about which orientation this Kiss board is going to go into. And if you look at it this way around with the Kiss logo, this is the front of the quad. And really the way you want to mount this board depends on your own build. Now if we look at the board, the majority of wiring we're going to have to do is around here, which is where we're going to be wiring Crossfire. But we're also going to be attaching buzzer wires here and power wires. And we've got two choices when it comes to using Kiss. You could use the connectors, or the majority of the connectors, or you can direct solder. And the choice is entirely down to yourself. There are tons of pinouts on Kiss, so if you choose to go that way, entirely down to yourself. Personally speaking, the only connectors I'm going to use are for RX3 and TX3, which are going to be for this guy. And the reason why that is because I can't access them on this board without using a connector or depinning it. When it comes to everything else, I prefer to direct solder. It's simpler, it's more reliable in my experience, and it just means that you don't end up breaking connectors and fanning around with dodgy connectors and all the rest of it. So it's a personal thing. Now because we're using these guys to mount it, and because this ESC is 20 by 20 ESC score is very deep, what I've done is just simply snipped down these parts of this 3D print with some clippers, like so. And that's just basically going to give me plenty of space when I mount them, so I'm not going to be close to my top plate and I've got enough room for my battery strap, etc. And when you look at these 3D prints, if you're using them, and of course you don't have to, you can just use screws and soft mounts, you'll notice that one is for that side and it kind of covers the, or should I say fits around the connectors, and obviously the other one is for the other side. And what I'm going to do now is just remove these little M3 nuts, which I temporarily used to attach my ESC and stop it moving around while I was doing this. And in my particular case, this DJI wire is a little bit long, so I'm just going to shove it down and out the way a little bit for now. And I'm going to double check which way I'm mounting my flight controller, which is this way. Get the right mount, which is this one. I'm basically just going to get these onto here. Now because the ESC's got these rubber, because the ESC's got these rubber gummies on it, don't worry about being too firm here. You want to sort of tighten this down so it's not going to come off again, but clearly you don't want to sort of put too much stress on it and break it. Right, so that's one side in, and if you wonder why the capacitor's dangling, it's because with the benefit of hindsight I realised that the regulator was sitting over the screw, so I just needed to basically get into here to tighten up the nuts because these screws are a little bit short. That's no big issue, so I'll just shove that guy back into place and then zip tie that on in a second. And we'll then do the same on the other side. Let's get a nut, shove it over the bolt, and then get the right driver and kind of screw it into itself. Right, so they're on, all is hunky-dory. So I can now get my Kiss flight controller and we can see and make sure that it all fits into place, which it does. And you can see we've got plenty of room along the top with the top plate. Actually, let's not do that. With the top plate, just to get that top plate on without causing any issues. So all we're going to do now is just run some little plastic M3 screws up, and I'm using plastic because we don't need the strength. This isn't a whole stack, and the 3D mount holds it really nicely. So we're just going to run some short M3 nylon screws up, and then we can screw our flight controller on top. Right, so our little plastic bolts are in place. We can now get our flight controller and sort of wedge it over. Obviously these bolts are a little bit topsy-turvy at the moment. Let's squash this guy in and get it where we want it. Make sure these wires are all out the way. Right, so our flight controller is on. Everything is hunky-dory, it all fits nicely, and at this stage all I'm going to do is just snip off this excess from the top of the bolts, so we don't need it. There, we're done. So now I've done that, I'm just going to take these guys off. And the next thing I'm going to do is wire the ESC connector to the flight controller and give it power. Right, the ESC comes with two cables. Comes with a long sort of plastic horrible one and it comes with a shorter silicone one. And I'm hoping, in fact, we should be okay to use the shorter of the two. And you'll notice if you consult your diagram that red is positive, black is obviously negative, and all your white wires are basically your motor wires, and then you've got your yellow wire which is current and your blue wire which is telemetry. Now because we're using the DJI system and because we're using Kiss, we don't want this blue or this yellow wire. So first thing we're going to do is remove them, because even if you were running a standard Kiss setup, you wouldn't get amps etc unless the ESC had separate shunts, which is not very common on little 4-in-1 ESCs. And if you're one of these guys who needs to know how many amps they're pulling, get a life. The only thing you need on your OSD is your RSSI or LQ to tell you when you're going to fall out the sky, of your voltage and your timer, and if you're using GPS, a home arrow. Which interestingly actually on the next DJI patch they're adding in a proper home arrow for GPS, and Alexander Fedorov has already got GPS working, so he'll be able to hitch into that, which will be nice. So let's plug this little connector into here. Right, so we're going to plug the connector in and then we're done. So we're just going to get our flight controller and we're going to start soldering. So the pads we're going to be touching are first of all the positive and negative. As you can see here, negative on the left, positive on the right. I'm not going to do them over the top onto these big pads. I'm just going to apply 2 little blobs of solder to the base of the board and just wire these guys underneath. I'm going to leave these wires long enough that I can comfortably lift the board off like so if I need to get underneath and see what's going on. The other thing I'm going to do is just twist these wires up, and that will just help A, stop the cables from snagging, and B, help reduce a little bit of noise. And somewhat nicely we can actually slip it underneath and then back round again, which makes me happy. So we're just basically going to clip the wires off here and solder to the bottom of the board like so. Don't want the wires again too short because we need to be able to access and take this guy off without faffing around. So 2 little tiny blobs of solder applied. Again, just going to pull the ends of these off, apply some solder to the ends of them, and I'm going to solder this guy in, obviously off camera because I can't see what I'm doing otherwise. Right, board is now soldered. If we've untwisted it, which we have, let's just twist it back up again. Keep those wires nice and together. And we're just going to sit this guy back on hither. He says as he puts it on the wrong way. So we've actually, if you've noticed, I've had a change of heart here, and I'm taking the power directly from the ESC. And that's just meant that the board is now in the right direction. And then we are left with these 4 wires, which if we consult our guide again, like so, we've got motor 1, 2, 3 and 4. But we know that the motors in Kiss are different. In fact, if we refer to my build mat, on Betaflight you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and on Kiss you've got 1, 2, 4. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. So clearly we need to do these and wire it in a different order. So the way we need to do this is, if we take motor 1, the bottom right, we need to use a different wire to make motor 1 spin. So that's obviously motor 1 in Betaflight, but in Kiss it's motor 3. So instead of using motor wire 1, this one, we're going to wire this one. And because there's always an element of, oh crap, I've got it the wrong way around, this is why I'm not using connectors. We're going to do this nice and simply. So all we're going to do is we're going to, at the corner of each side of the board, you can see there's a little number. So we've got 4, 3, 2 and 1. And to make life ever so simple for ourselves, we're just going to apply a blob of solder to each of those pads. I'm going to attach our wires to them, and that way, if for some reason we've messed up with the order, we can simply just blob them off and move them to the other one until we're happy with it. Right, motor wires are soldered on, and you'll notice that I've left them all at their full length. And the reason I've done that is because these little wires are super simple just to blob on and off. And bearing in mind it's 10 o'clock at night and I've had a hard day at work and I'm knackered, there's a chance that I've put one of these on the wrong signal pad. And if I have, so be it. It's an easy thing to do when we test the motors later on. If you want this motor to spin and that motor turns by accident, just swap the wires around until they're right. And it's easier to do that if you've left them all long rather than shortening them all and making them all pretty and then realise, oh crap, I've made a mistake, and you've got to mess around lengthening them. So at this stage, just leave it loose. None of those wires are really going to cause us any issues regardless, even if we leave them that way. Nothing is causing us vibration or anything that's going to affect this flight controller there. So I'm more than happy the way that is. If you've got a bit of an OCD and you want it all to be pretty and perfect, shorten them, but do it later when you know everything is all okay. So that is the quad essentially built. The only thing we've got to do now is add in crossfire and a beeper, and we're done. Right, so I've got a crossfire receiver, and I've literally just pulled this out of my drawer so you can see it's already wired up. And I'm not sure how well this camera is focusing, but the antenna connector is basically there. So again, red wire positive, black wire negative, and then we've got these two wires, in this case pink and white. So all we're going to do, because I'm going to be using the Halorc RC Hero 7 mount, which is working really well for me, and I use it with basically a lens protector, which Halorc RC also do as well, and you can find the files to download on his website or buy these. Because we're using this and it's been working really well, so I'm just going to continue. Usually I would mount crossfire on the arm, etc. So I'm just going to mount the crossfire in here on the bike. And while the crossfire antenna will just about wedge through this top plate, rather than sort of forcing it through, all I'm going to do at this stage is get rid of this battery strap first of all, is shove the antenna through, set the top plate down, and then attach the antenna. And with crossfire I like to mount my antennas like so, and then heat shrink over the top. Because we're using this little UFL connector, they're quite sensitive, they're easy to pop off, so we just want to heat shrink over the top of that. So what I need to do is just make sure that I've got long enough wire, because this has come out of another quad, just to fit in. And I kind of like it actually the way I had it in my other one, although I've got more space in this guy because I'm not using the extra capacitor. It kind of fits nicely down there, and although it sticks out a tiny little bit, I kind of like it, because it means if I need to bind up, or someone else needs to bind up to my quad or anything like that, I can just basically lift it out and get easy access to it. So I just need to make sure if I do that, that these wires, as I said, are going to be long enough, and I bet sod's law says they're probably not going to be. No, I'm not happy with that, so I'm going to lengthen the positive and negative. I don't want any sort of force or stress on these wires, so I'm just going to quickly solder a couple more wires on. Right, so I've connected some longer wires. Let's twist these round again, nice and tight, and then we'll do the same like so, and just get one nice little bunch. And then I'll get this antenna, connect it back up again, loop it round. I'm going to get a bit of heat shrink and basically just shrink over the top like so. So that is all hunky-dory. And then I'm basically just going to get this guy down there and attach it on with a little bit of 3M foam tape. And when you stick this on, just kind of leave it, because if you fiddle around with it, it won't stick very well. But if you leave it, it rarely comes off. And if you're concerned about it, just attach a zip tie through the holes in the frame. I'm just going to loop this wire back round again. He says as his own work comes undone. Just kind of wiggle it down. Might have to do that at the end. Sorry, you can't see. Right, so let's get this guy sandwiched in properly, and then we'll solder this together. So that's the way the flight controller should be. So I want this guy to loop over here and onto here, and just snip the worst of that off again. So there it is, all wired up. And let me just pull the receiver out actually, just so you can see. So obviously red and black are hither, ground next to it positive. The white wire is going to the big pad in the center, and the white wire on the receiver is at the very opposite side to the ground wire, which is black. And then the pinky wire is basically sitting under it there. So you've got ground positive, and then I can never remember which way around they go, RX or TX, and then obviously the white wire as well. And that is that. So the only thing we've got left to do is add our buzzer and MSP. So we're pretty much done. So I've soldered on the receiver wires, as I said. The buzzer, I've decided just to sit here on a couple of layers of 3M foam tape, and at the corner here you will see that the red is buzzer plus, the yellow is buzzer minus, known as the signal. And I've just picked up the nearest ground, which is here, which is obviously ground, and that is it. And the reason why I've put the buzzer here, which seems like an odd place because it's relatively loose, is I've found on other builds that the best way to mount your buzzer, bearing in mind it's your lifeline in a crash to find your quad again, is just to get a length of foam tape, double it over a few times, and simply sit it on top of the buzzer. And that way when the top plate goes on, it will nicely sandwich the buzzer just ever so gently between the top plate and obviously its bottom layer of 3M foam tape. And what that means is that in a really big crash, we've got a little bit of soft mounting for the buzzer. It's not going to get huge amounts of vibration and break. And it's worked really well on other quads, so I'm happy to use it. So we are pretty much done. The only thing we need to do now is the last piggly bit, which is connect these guys, which will give us voltage, timer, and depending on what firmware of Alexander's you're using, can also give you pretty much anything you want. Right, for the very last part of this, we're sadly going to have to use a connector unless you want to start depinning flight controllers. And we're going to be using a 6-pin connector. But we're only going to be using two wires. And the reason why we're only going to be using 2 wires is the only ones we want are TX and RX, and they're the wires. And that connector is just basically going to slot into here, like so. And the 2 wires that we've left on this connector are to connect So we have these two wires left, grey and white. And this is RX on the left of the screen, and this is TX. We want to join the grey to RX, and we want to join the grey to RX and the white to the one on the right, which is TX. So all we're going to do is get these guys and work out really roughly how much wire we want. And ideally, as my camera struggles to focus, ideally leave these guys pretty long and the DJI wires pretty short. So let's just lift this flight controller out of the way, because we might as well run these wires underneath so they catch less scraggle. And then we want to sort of get this wire, you don't want to make your life hard, so sort of keep it relatively long, because again, there's nothing worse than wires that are too short making things difficult. And we'll just again snip them off, and all we're going to do is strip the ends off again, expose a little bit more wire than we generally would do. Should have pulled these guys apart first actually. So we'll expose a little bit more wire than we usually would do, and we'll tin up the end, and then we'll do the same on the black wires. And we're not soldering the space shuttle here, so all we're going to do is just join them together, heat them with a soldering iron, let go of obviously move the iron away from it until they're nicely pressed together. And because obviously we're going to have exposed wires, we need to use a little bit of heat shrink here. So if I get my handy box of heat shrink, and I got this off Amazon for about a £5, it comes with loads of different sizes. So we just want a sort of smallish piece, like so, and we'll just trim that to size. And then after we've tinned up the ends, we'll just slide over this heat shrink ready to slip back over the soldered joint. And just to make my life easier, obviously I've taken out the cable while I do this. Right, wires are soldered together. So all we're going to do is again, let's move the flight controller out of the way, turn this round and plug it back in again. And again, this wire is a bit long, but I'm not too worried about that, because I can just tuck it up and round. Let's just get this guy sat in place, and then we'll just twist this wire and sit it there. And it looks like a bit of a bird's nest, because there's a lot of wires in the same place, but again, it's not going to cause us any issue. And then all we need to do is pop on our nuts. So the only thing left to do is zip tie this ESC back on again, and we are. So there we have her, all wrapped up and ready to party. And it looks very, very nice indeed. Total weight with its mount and all the other gubbins, 379 grams. But obviously the mount weighs a good 15 or 20 grams. So, proof in the pudding. All is well in the world, because we have LEDs. And if you want to know how to stop your buzzer from buzzing, job's a good one. So clearly our work is not done. I need to set this guy up in case and all the rest of it, but this video has been long enough, and frankly I am bored of videoing this quadcopter build. What I want to do is get this guy set up and go and fly it, so in another video I'll show you how to do that. But for now, thanks for watching. Cheers guys, thank you, bye bye.